Well, let's get started working with all the strengths that you've gathered during steps 1 and 2. We're going to talk you through the 4 steps it takes to create a top 10 prioritized strengths list. And the first step is to gather all together in one place all of the strengths you have articulated so far. So if you're like me, these strengths are here, there, and everywhere. I had strengths on Word documents, in little booklets, on my phone, on pieces of paper. And I was lucky if I could find them. So I gathered them, I hunted and searched, and I gathered them all into one place when I was ready to create my top 10 list. I had a piece of paper, a notebook, and I just started recording all of these strengths, words, and phrases onto 2 pages of notebook paper. That's about how much space it was. And altogether, I would say it could have been 60 strengths. 60 strengths. And some of those were the same strength more than once. And some of them were so similar that I didn't record both. So you use a little bit of editing if you're like me, and just start putting down all of the strengths you find. Now, that's me, but that is not the only way to do it. And Gerald did it differently. I really like his method of how he gathered his strengths together. So let's hear about that. Gerald?
Okay. Well, when I did it, I've been doing this for years, and so but the major thing I remember that when I did most of it was I decided to put them on cards, each strength on cards. So as I went along, a little, 2 by, what did I call them? 2 by 5 or 2 by 4. I don't know, those little cards, index cards you have, and so I had been articulating strengths on lists and things like that, and I just looked at some of the lists and things I had around, and I just took out key ones and I put a card for the most important strengths. And so I had a bunch of cards, index cards with strengths on them, and I don't know how many, it might have been 50 or something. I'm not sure how many I ended up with, but basically then when I was clustering them, that's what the next step is.
Going on to step 2, yes.
Step
Okay.
2 is the clustering. And so I just looked at the cards and I started putting them in different places on the table. And so that the ones that are like it were piled together. And so I maybe had, 3 or 4 in a cluster, or 5.
Let's take a look at that, because we have a slide that shows one of your clustered strengths. And we won't talk about naming it yet, because
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about how I clustered them. But let's look at one of your clusters.
Okay.
Let's see here. There we go.
No.
So here's one of your clusters. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, these are ones about my internal way of focusing, how I'm looking at myself, and I realized that somewhere along the way that I don't regret things. Another one I wrote on a card: I accept weaknesses, and maybe someplace else I focus on strengths, and then being grateful came in there too, a little different than the others, but it fits in the cluster.
That's great. So now this would have been one pile of cards for you.
Yeah,
this would have been 4 cards all grouped together.
Yeah.
All right. So
And then
when I did it, just the clustering part, I did it intuitively at the same time that I was doing step 1 partly. So my clusters came out intuitively. I was looking for resonance or kind of similarity or sameness as I was going along. And it wasn't always something that someone else would recognize as sameness, right? It had to do with feelings for me. Like say I'm a photographer and I'm a writing teacher. Those might seem very different to someone else, but to me, I might say I'm creative in both cases. I'm creating classes and I'm creating photographs. So it can be very different for different people. And for you viewers who are doing this, trust yourself as you're going along. See what seems similar, and you might discover the similarity as you're working with them. So just see what feels right to you. So that's clustering. I was clustering on paper and Gerald was clustering his cards. And I really like Gerald's method because it's so flexible, but my method worked okay for me too. So Gerald, is there anything else about clustering?
No, that's all the clustering, but then the naming of the clusters might be the next topic. And
Yeah, let's look at this example because we have your
yeah,
name down there.
okay, yeah. So I just noticed there that they all were about how I feel, and the key one where I accept my weaknesses was the one that maybe gave me the clue that the acceptance was important there. And so I looked at them. Well, even I focus on strengths, it's kind of acceptance too, and being grateful. So I just decided to call all four one self-acceptance. And so that just gives a little bit bigger, a more abstract concept to fit these with. So self-acceptance is something that I decide that I have, and I've never seen that as a topic and personality tests or anything like that. But that's perfectly good for me. I think it's I accept myself, and that's a pretty neat thing to do. Yeah.
It is neat. Well, this step is actually really important. Like you were saying it's the more abstract,
Mhm.
but what it is an umbrella term that takes in the whole cluster, ideally. And the reason we do this, the reason we make a title or an abstraction or a name for these clusters is because we're working toward a positive identity. And our minds can't hold on to all the positive experiences and all the articulated strengths.
Mhm.
We need to distill it down to something the mind can hold on to as representative of these good feelings that we have and the good thoughts we have about ourselves. And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to find the thing that feels just right and feels like the mind will hold on to it, feels like we'll get it when we use these terms of what do I mean about myself. So it's a really important step and something to spend time with and to keep revising, right? You don't have to do it one time and then you're done with it. You keep making it better and better, and it feels really good to say, oh yeah, that does really seem like who I am in my own sense of myself.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else about naming, Gerald?
No, I think that's enough to talk about for now.
Okay, so let's talk about prioritizing, and this is related to the naming. As we were saying, we're working toward a positive identity, and we don't really know how many concepts you can hold on to about yourself at any one time. So knowing what is the number one strength, maybe the top 5 strengths, is pretty important because that will influence your sense of self the most. Do you have something to add to that, Gerald, about the final list and prioritizing?
No, I can't think of anything right now.
Yeah, it's not a complicated step, but it's an important one with regard to changing how you feel about yourself and establishing a firmly rooted positive identity.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing about is seeing patterns and the more you see the pattern and use words for it, it'll just become more natural for you to do. So it's a process of self-clarification, I think you might call it.
That's a great word for it. Yeah, self-clarification of your positive attributes.
Yeah.
All right. So if you need more support with this, please go to our book, Articulating Your Strengths. And this step is described in chapter 5. Anything else, Gerald?
Nope, I think that does it.